So Mike, it's
Okay.
all yours.
Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here. And I listened to Annette, and I was patient with her because I largely agreed with what she told me. And I saw in her, and I've always seen in her, a really enlightened practitioner, somebody that coming from a different with a very different history on a parallel path, developed a common, strongly overlapping perspective about how to approach helping people be better and stronger. And I want to start by saying a little bit about my book, because for those of you who don't know about it or are in the audience and haven't read it or don't know what it's about, I want to try to get you to buy it. It's not very expensive. It's not about making money. It's not about that at all. It's about helping you have a better older life. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I began to understand quite a few years ago as a scientist that we have a brain that's plastic. And I began to understand myself what that meant. It meant that our brain is continuously changing by what we do. And what we do really matters, because what we do represents the basis of the creation of the person we are. And because the brain is plastic, we're subject to continuous revision. Now, that revision can be in a positive direction. You can move in a positive direction, and that's what my book is about. It's trying to explain to you how to think about what you should be doing to move your brain in a positive direction. And who the hell wouldn't want to do that, really? Because we're all capable at any point of life of being better next week, of being better next year. That's also what Annette's practices are all about. It's about being better next week. It's about being better next year. And we have this power in us because we're actually constructed to create the person we are within our lifetimes, within our skulls. So in my book, you have to go through a certain level of science, of explanation, because I am a nerd, okay? But don't let that intimidate you. You should know these things. Everyone should know these things. People should understand that they've been given this great gift, that they have the gift to change themselves, to transform themselves even. And one of the wonderful things about plasticity is it doesn't pay too much attention to where you've been, doesn't pay too much attention to the struggles that you've had in life. It's still there with you as a resource. It's still with you to make your life better, and it can be the basis of miracles in a life. It can be. So anyway, read the book, and if you want to gain a little bit more about this perspective. I also came here with a friend. And the friend is a man that I first met about a year ago. And my pal is Rex Lipman, who's sitting in the front row. And Rex comes to us from Adelaide, Australia. And I might say Rex came here by himself 2 days ago. He's 92 years old. But that's just not a problem for him, because he's full of life, and actually life is not as big a challenge as it is for him as it is for most 92-year-olds. So he's going back in 2 more days. And he's got to go back because he's got a lot of fish to fry in Australia. I just want to say a little bit about Rex, because I'm going to call on Rex to answer a few of the questions that you might raise in the audience, because he's had a lot of experience in life. So I want to tell you a little bit about him. So Rex grew up in Adelaide. His father was a dentist, a very good family. And he began working in life during the Depression when he was 15 years old. And he worked for several years. And ultimately, because Australia basically had to go to war with Britain, he cheated a little bit to get into the military early. He was actually the youngest lieutenant in the Australian Army at the first part of the war because he was a cheater. And his military career was probably most remarkable for the fact that he survived it. So Rex, among other things, was a commando on Japanese-occupied territory in the islands of north of Australia, where many people that had that kind of duty, that had that kind of wartime responsibility, didn't survive. And he knows that he's a very lucky person to have gotten through that in life. And he went on to come back ultimately to be a military leader back in Adelaide after the war, after a distinguished military career. And at the same time, he struggled with what he might do in life. His father had been a very well-known dentist in Adelaide, so he went to dental school, and Rex became a dentist. I might say that Rex has had a life of transformation. He went from first being a soldier, he thought he'd be a soldier perhaps for life. But the next thing you know, he's a practicing dentist, and he's a very prominent dentist, one of the most distinguished dentists in his nation. But pretty soon, he's called upon because he speaks fluent French in Adelaide, and because the people of Adelaide are all up in arms about the French, because they're nuclear testing hydrogen bombs in an atoll not too far away from Australia. The French desperately needed a consulate, a council official in Adelaide, so Rex said, well, why not? I'll do it. I'll take it on as a volunteer. Well, it turns out he was a French consul for 14 or 15 years. And meanwhile, because he met people through his French consulate experience in banking, he became a banker. So pretty soon, he's left Adelaide, and he's the head of a division of a big bank in Adelaide. And pretty soon, he's a little bit dissatisfied. His life is not complete enough, and he decides to raise racehorses. So on his beautiful farm near Adelaide, he raised some of the great horses, spent time there in his stables, some of the great horses in Australia in this era, trained by one of the great trainers in greatest trainers in Australian history. Most people would, at some point at this point, Rex is getting on towards the age that we could say you're approaching retirement. And a lot of people would say, well, Rex, gee, maybe take it easy. Rex took it easy. He established a school, a 4-year university-based educational program, because he saw that there was a necessity to professionalize the training of young people in Australia to operate in the hotel and hospitality industry. So he creates what becomes a world-famous school. People come from all over the world to this place in Adelaide, Australia, to be trained in this industry. And what he does is professionalize it. This is not a sometime job. It's not just something you do casually. You go there and you really are educated on a deep level about all kinds of things that relate to this kind of professional life. He basically helps in Australia transform this to a profession. Well, you might say that might be enough for Rex because he's getting on in years, but only in years as the calendar counts them. He goes back to England and writes a series of history books. Well, why not? At age 80, why wouldn't you think of doing that? Why wouldn't that occur to you, right? Rex has transformed himself in life about a dozen times. He's basically gone from, and each time he's done it with a high level of success. Every one of you in this room have the capacity to transform yourself. In fact, multiple times in your life. And probably most of you ought to do it a time or 2 or 10 in your life. Because that's what your brain is looking for. Your brain is looking for action. It's all about having a better life at any point in life. It's all about looking forward in life and saying, how can I be stronger, more complete, more interesting, more vital? If you do the right things with your brain in life, you'll have a better life. You'll have a longer life. And you're sure as hell will have a safer life. And what you really want to have is a brain that doesn't just hang in there until you pass from this mortal coil, which for most individuals among us, it just does not do. Most of our compatriots out there die with a diagnosis of senility, right? But it's also about passing from this mortal coil full of it. And that's something I know, whatever else I can say about my friend Rex Lippman, will apply to him. When he does decide to give it all in, it will be because he's taken away from us and not because he's volunteering to quit. Rex is now committed in Australia to help transform Australia and Australians to be aware of the fact that they have a plastic brain. That's his mission. And he's just written a draft of a book, and the title of the book he's given is Don't Miss the Bus, because he's pretty sure that most older Australians are clearly missing the bus, right? They do not understand that when it comes to their brain, to their neurology, they are in charge. And this is something that we have to educate the citizens of our great country to understand. When it comes to your brain and your brain health, it matters to you every bit as much as does your physical health, and you are in charge. If it goes to hell, if you slide into Never Never Land, usually it's your own damn fault. And that's really the message of my book, and it's really something I think we'll talk about more later in this conversation. Thank you.